The history of the project at Eden's Gate is the history of one family, the Seeds. 3 brothers, Jacob, Joseph, and John, were born into a broken home with an abusive, alcoholic father, an uncaring mother afraid to act, crushed by her marriage. During a particularly brutal beating, Joseph heard a voice he would come to associate with God, and that would in turn come to shape and guide his life. Such beatings were unfortunately common for the brothers, and soon such abuses were noticed by school officials. The parents were incarcerated, but for the brothers, their troubles had only just begun. Jacob, the eldest, would find his rebellious attitude leading to his own incarceration with time. Even so, his belief in honor and his leadership skills would shine through, and he would enlist in the U.S. Army. In his service across the Middle East, he would be decorated multiple times, and on a particular deployment, he would be shot down. His partner wounded and with limited food, he was forced to make a hard decision, one which would leave him suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Being declared unfit for service, he would spend years in a military hospital, but as his money ran out, he would be discharged and left homeless. For John, the youngest brother, he would be adopted by a wealthy and religious family. His adoptive parents saw in him a corrupted soul. Through fundamentalist pastors and interrogations, John was psychologically tortured into confessing any and all sins. With time, he developed the skills to manipulate others, allowing them to see what he had wanted them to see. Graduating top of his class, he made himself a model of success, rapidly rising in his law firm, growing wealthy. But despite this, he had developed a deep hatred for society and for the person he was. For Joseph, the middle brother, he would pass through several families, finding it difficult to make friends. His life was lonely and he bounced from job to job, state to state. The only constant in his life, the voice. In time, he would find solace in a wife, Faith, and from her, a daughter. His solace was lost in an instant as Faith perished in a car accident. In that moment, the voice gave him an apocalyptic vision of the punishment that would be inflicted upon the world, and of the birth of Eden's Gate. So overwhelming was this vision that he chose to end his daughter's life, to prove his willingness to serve the voice regardless of the cost. Joseph sought out his brothers. He found both in their hometown, and both were soon swayed to his vision. Joseph, now known as the Father, began to preach from a former slaughterhouse, and slowly his congregation grew, building itself from the downtrodden, those left adrift and marginalized in an uncaring world, promising family, community, and above all, purpose. When one of their church members disappeared, the Seeds became the subject of a police investigation. While never found guilty of any involvement, the brothers agreed that it was time to move the church. They chose an isolated and defensible location, Hope County, Montana. Upon their arrival, John used his extensive wealth to buy land, his connections and legal skills protecting their burgeoning church from outside interference. Initially, relations with the county's other residents were peaceful, but as the church continued to buy up land, take control of the local radio station, espouse their visions and great proselytization drives, and began to pay off members of the local sheriff's office, they were in effect engaging in a silent takeover of the county. The father anointed his blood family, and a young woman of his flock rechristened Faith as his heralds, so that they may guide his growing flock, effectively dividing the county amongst them, and bestowing upon each a a vast underground bunker complex where they might endure the coming collapse. As the church's power grew, so too did the criticism, the stories surrounding it. Stories of farmers being forced off their land, people being abducted, tortured, and forced to confess their sins, or to be drugged, baptized, and indoctrinated into the faith. Such stories garnered the attention of national law enforcement, and when a video appeared that seemingly corroborated these stories, a warrant was issued. The U.S. Marshal, backed by local sheriffs, moved to arrest the father, a move that he had long predicted and preached was a signal of the imminent collapse. The faithful rose in anger against the invading officers, freeing the father and capturing most of them, beginning a great reaping across the county. The father's heralds were unleashed to seize resources and to seek individuals to induct into their faith. Each of his heralds embracing their own unique method of indoctrination. John harkened back to his childhood and engaged in coercive confessions and body mutilation. Faith used bliss, a chemical agent made from the flowers of her domain with hallucinogenic properties, to reduce the fearful and the questioning into mindless angels. Jacob engaged in classical conditioning, practice he had honed in the training of wolves. The forces rallied by the heralds varied greatly in competency, from rank-and-file members with some proficiency with firearms but lacking any combat experience, to masses of angels and the elite chosen, handpicked by Jacob, supported by his fearsome judges. The resistance slowly gained the upper hand, rallied and led by surviving officers. As the fighting spread to all corners of the county, one by one the heralds fell and their gates were left in ruin. The officers moved against the father once more. He had been broken, his family dead, his plans in ruin, his faithful scattered or dying. But as they dragged him away, his fears were proven right. Brilliant light erupted on the horizon, resolving into mushroom clouds. Atomic fires whipped across the land even as additional bombs fell. The surviving members of the church escaped this nuclear holocaust within the confines of John's Gate. Yet this bunker complex had sustained heavy damage in the fighting. Starvation, disease, and the constant threat of flooding. For years they lived on a knife's edge, unsure if they would endure. And one day, the father returned and led his people from the decaying bunker, telling him of the new world God had built for them. The survivors emerged and were joined by faithful who had not made it to the bunkers, including one who claimed to be the father's son, Ethan. The new world was harsh, and many struggled to survive, and many more would have, if not for the discovery of an apple tree in the northern reaches of Hope County. A land devastated and shrouded in vast clouds of bliss. The apples of this tree had miraculous qualities. Those chosen by the Father to consume them were blessed with superhuman strength and resilience. Together, the faithful worked to build a new Eden, forgoing technology. Seeing in it the cause of the collapse, they sought to live in harmony with nature and in peace with the other survivors of Hope County. This peace was not to last, as a group of raiders known as the Highwaymen descended upon the county like a horde of locusts, their violence, machinery, and scavenging standing in stark contrast to New Eden's philosophy. The father was once more disheartened, and chose to leave in a self-imposed exile, waiting for the prophesied shepherd that they had seen in their dreams to come and lead his people. In his place, Ethan rose to be the de facto leader. Ambitious and prideful, he sought to discredit his father in the eyes of the faithful, resenting that he would leave them. When a representative of the county's other survivors arrived with an unprecedented proposal of working together against the highwaymen, Ethan distrusted this individual. And in that distrust, he sent them to find the father, believing that they would fail or prove that their father was nothing but a dead man. Not only did this outsider succeed in finding the father, but they had been blessed by the father as his God-ordained successor, blessed with a sacred apple. The flock rejoiced at the return of the father, even as Ethan's seed. For years he had overseen and guided them, and in a moment they had turned their back upon him. The chosen of New Eden struck out against the invaders in the garden, inflicting heavy losses upon them, their very success making them a target. Ethan's greed and resentment rose within him, and he called upon the highwaymen to strike those who had betrayed him. In his anger, New Eden burned while he trekked north to the sacred apple tree, seeking to empower himself and prove himself greater than his father. In so doing, the corruption of his soul spread to his flesh. His mind grew animalistic, and the outsider and the father were forced to put him down. The father, his faithful once more, having been scattered to the winds, their homes and temples burned, his family once more having been killed. He came to believe his soul had become but a cancer. Regret filled him. Regret for the death and destruction that had arisen in his effort to save mankind. Regret for those that died and suffered under his name. Some say he died moments after his son. Others that he left to wander the waste searching for a new purpose.